You lie in a London bed that is, frankly, about as comfortable as a haystack with ambition. The mattress beneath you is lumpy, the sheets scratch like they've been washed with gravel, and the room is glowing faintly from the new gas lamps outside your window. It is Victorian London, and everyone is a little too excited about modern progress to bother dimming the lights at night. You, meanwhile, are wide awake. Welcome to the sleepless streets. Victorian Londoners, like you right now, did not take insomnia lightly. They talked about it, wrote about it, and tried to sell each other solutions with the enthusiasm of late-night infomercials. Picture the scene. The streets are still alive with the clop of horse hooves, the hiss of steam, the faint smell of coal smoke, and the sound of someone loudly insisting that a bottle of miracle tonic will cure everything from headaches to night terrors. That's insomnia, rebranded as a villain worthy of an expensive cure. The funny thing is, people in the 19th century were just discovering how noisy their new world was. Before gaslight, cities got dark and stayed dark, but now there was illumination humming on every block. Historians still debate whether the invention of gas lamps helped society or merely gave Londoners another excuse to stare out the window all night like raccoons. And here you are, mentally raccooning through Victorian London, eyes wide open, convinced you're never going to sleep. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And because I know you're awake at some ungodly hour, let me know in the comments where you are and what time at Island. Think of it as a strange midnight census. Now, back to your insomnia. Imagine stepping out into the street in your nightshirt, like some Dickensian ghost. Vendors are still calling out. You catch the cry of a seller offering warm pies that you really shouldn't eat at this hour, but you're tempted. Another fellow waves a pamphlet in your face about a lecture on nervous disorders next Tuesday, which may or may not involve leeches. Meanwhile, a constable eyes you suspiciously because wandering around in slippers at midnight is not exactly fashionable. One canonical moment anchors this. In 1829, the Metropolitan Police were founded, and suddenly, patrolmen with rattles and lanterns became a fixture of the night. Imagine trying to drift off to sleep while someone rattles a wooden clacker under your window to signal all's well. All is not well, you're awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if a clacker is supposed to be calming. It is not. There is an odd fact buried in the newspapers of the time. Some people believed that lying on your left side for too long would invite nightmares. Right side apparently was safer. Nobody quite explained why, but advice manuals were full of such instructions. Never fall asleep with your hands above your head, one guide warned, lest you awaken with faintness. You roll over, of course, and immediately put your hands above your head, just to test the theory. Meanwhile, the new fascination with nervous disorders had doctors scribbling notes about sleepless patients. Some claimed it was caused by overwork, others by overeating, and still others by the mysterious force of night air. London's air, to be clear, was mostly smoke and dampness, so night air didn't stand much of a chance of curing anything. Historians still debate whether doctors genuinely believed in bad air or just needed a convenient scapegoat. Imagine lying awake with the sounds of carriage wheels over cobblestones, punctuated by the occasional cry of murder, which, more often than not, was just someone shouting about a spilled pint of beer. You fluff your pillow, which is basically sawdust in a sack, and sigh. Sleep remains elusive. Your neighbour is hammering something inexplicable at midnight. Across the alley, a piano is playing badly. You wonder if Mozart ever predicted that his work would one day torture sleepless Londoners through thin brick walls. At some point, you consider joining the stream of nightwalkers, those strange souls who strolled the gaslit streets in search of inspiration, danger, or just something to do at midnight. Poets claimed that wandering London in the small hours sharpened their creativity. Doctors, on the other hand, insisted that it sharpened your risk of catching tuberculosis. Which is it? Historians, naturally, still debate. Even the animals seem to conspire against sleep. Rats scuttled through rafters with the determination of professional burglars. Cats yowled in the alleys as if auditioning for opera. And horses occasionally whinnied at nothing at all. All of it echoed into the rooms of the sleepless, turning a quiet night into a sort of clattering concert. If you close your eyes now, you can picture yourself lying there in your uncomfortable bed, telling yourself you'll try just one more position. Maybe if you flip upside down and point your feet at the headboard? No, that doesn't work either. You are not alone, though. Victorian London is restless with you. Merchants are bottling fake cures, doctors are scribbling notes, poets are walking aimlessly, and rats are composing symphonies. The whole city hums, restless, waiting for some elusive sleep that never quite arrives. It's almost comforting, isn't it? Knowing that even 150 years ago, someone else was staring at the ceiling, muttering, "Why am I still awake?" And if misery loves company, then at least you and Charles Dickens probably shared the same Insomnia playlist. Footsteps, bells, and a generous dose of frustration. You're still awake, of course. By now the pillow has developed a permanent groove in the shape of your increasingly unimpressed skull. You've tried counting sheep, but the sheep seem to be unionized and refuse to jump fences past number 37. Desperation sets in, and this is exactly the mood that Victorian London's patent medicine industry was waiting for. The moment you mention insomnia, someone will sell you a bottle. Step outside, and the shops are plastered with posters promising guaranteed restorative sleep in a single dose, usually followed by the small print. Side effects may include dizziness, indigestion, or death, but you can't blame them for trying. After all, it's 1850, and medical advertising is the Wild West of London print culture. Imagine yourself wandering into a chemist's shop, shelves groaning under bottles of every size and shape. Brightly coloured labels shout at you in curly Victorian typefaces. Dr. Collis Brown's Chlorodyne promises to calm every nervous complaint. What they don't say is that it's essentially a cocktail of chloroform, morphine, and sometimes cannabis. Sleepy? Certainly. Safe? Well, historians still debate whether people genuinely felt cured or just pleasantly unconscious. Laudanum was the superstar of the era. Derived from opium and diluted with alcohol, it was as common as aspirin is today. Mothers gave it to colicky babies, workers took it for aches, and insomniacs sipped it to silence their racing thoughts. Picture yourself pouring a spoonful into your evening tea. It doesn't just take the edge off, it takes the edge, the corners, and the entire table. The poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge was famous for his laudanum use, which explains why some of his dreamlike verses read like fevered half-naps. Kubla Khan, after all, might just be the world's most eloquent opium dream, but it wasn't all respectable chemists and poetic hallucinations. Oh no. Street hawkers peddled their own insomnia cures, often brewed in basements where hygiene was more of a rumour than a practice. One odd fact, a popular soothing syrup sold to tired mothers was later found to contain hefty doses of morphine. It certainly soothed the baby, sometimes permanently, and yet Victorians bought these bottles eagerly. Maybe it was the bold labels with little cherubs falling asleep on clouds. Maybe it was the persuasive newspaper ads. Or maybe it was the pure hope that something would finally work. Picture yourself handing over a coin for a tiny vial of Dr. Tibble's restorative elixir, convinced that tonight, at last, you'll sleep like a log. Spoiler, you'll probably hallucinate that you are a log. There was also bromide, hailed as a wonder drug for nervous excitability. Doctors prescribed it for everything from sleeplessness to excessive enthusiasm. In one canonical case from 1857, Charles Locock, physician to Queen Victoria herself, recommended potassium bromide as a sedative. Imagine entire dinner parties where half the guests were so bromide blissed that they could barely stay awake long enough to eat the blancmange. And of course, the advertisements grew increasingly desperate. Guaranteed to send you to sleep in 10 minutes, one ad cried, or your money back. No word on whether refunds were ever issued, since most customers were either unconscious or too drowsy to complain. Historians still debate whether Victorian consumers were gullible, desperate, or just entertained by the sheer creativity of the sales pitches. As you sip your imaginary patent medicine, you realize that the chemist shop is as much theatre as pharmacy. The glass jars filled with mysterious powders, the scales and brass instruments, the faint smell of alcohol and opium. It's all designed to reassure you that science has this figured out. You're not just buying sleep, you're buying the performance of progress. But not every remedy was chemical. Some bottles contain nothing more than sugar water dyed pink, sold under names like Sleepies or Dr. Slumber's syrup. And sometimes the placebo worked. You'd close your eyes, convince yourself the magic was coursing through your veins, and finally drift off. Maybe that's the most Victorian cure of all, the triumph of belief over biology. Still, there's something almost charming about the chaos of it all. You're standing there, vial in hand, trying to decide whether you want to risk chloroform or gamble on sugar water. It's late, the streets are buzzing with gaslight and gossip, and you're just one sleepless Londoner among thousands, all searching for that elusive cure. You think of Coleridge again, scribbling in his notebook between laudanum dreams, and wonder whether you'll wake up tomorrow a poet or not at all. Either way, you're still awake tonight, and the bottles on the shelves wink at you like conspirators. Sleep is a business, and in Victorian London, business is booming. Your head is heavy now, not from sleep, but from the faint dizziness of whatever concoction you just tried. If the bottle promised a gentle drift into dreamland, the reality is more like balancing on a seesaw in a storm. Perhaps something simpler is needed. Victorians certainly thought so. Why risk morphine when you can just drink your way into slumber? Welcome to the world of bedtime beverages. Picture yourself in a modest London parlour, the wallpaper patterned with faded roses and the fire crackling low. On the table, a steaming mug of hot milk. Yes, hot milk still the champion of bedtime rituals. It smells faintly sweet, a touch singed at the edges, like someone forgot to stir. Victorian advice columns praised it endlessly. A cup of warmed milk, flavoured with nutmeg, will calm the mind. Never mind that half the city was lactose intolerant. The ritual was what mattered. But the Victorians were nothing if not inventive with their nightcaps. Ale was a popular choice, specifically posset, a blend of warm milk curdled with ale or wine, spiced and thickened. Imagine drinking what feels like a dessert that decided to pick a fight with itself. It was heavy, filling, and guaranteed to knock you into a stupor. Historians still debate whether people genuinely enjoyed posset or simply tolerated it for its narcotic punch. There was also sleeping draughts, of a more innocent sort, chamomile tea, valerian root infusions, or barley water, brewed in kitchens that smelled of herbs and damp wood. Chamomile, to be fair, is still on the menu today. But the Victorians often mixed it with opium, because why stop at flowers when you can turbocharge the experience? Odd fact, 1860, one household manual recommended onion tea as a sleep aid. Yes, onion. Slice it, steep it, sip it. Supposedly, it cooled the blood. You, of course, can already imagine what it did to your breath. Romantic bedtime gestures must have been a struggle when both partners smelled like a soup kitchen. Meanwhile, wealthier insomniacs could afford exotic imports. Turkish sherbet syrups sweetened with rose water, Indian hemp infusions, even the occasional cup of Chinese sleeping tea, which probably contained more opium than leaves. The drinks arrived in delicate porcelain cups, carried on trays by yawning servants who, ironically, probably slept just fine without any of it. In 1858, the Medical Times reported a canonical event, the widespread debate over alcohol as a sleep aid. Some doctors praised a glass of brandy at night, claiming it soothed the nerves. Others warned it merely excited the blood and delayed true rest. The debate still echoes today. Historians still argue whether Victorians were honestly convinced of the medicinal benefits or simply used medicine as a polite excuse for an extra drink. As you sit there, cup in hand, the house creaks. Outside, the muffled sound of carriage wheels over cobblestones blends with the faint hiss of the gas lamp. You take a sip, sweet, bitter, or oniony, depending on your luck. Your eyelids droop for a moment, then pop open again. Perhaps the problem isn't the drink at all. Perhaps it's that London itself never truly sleeps, and neither, apparently, do you. You lean back in your chair, listening to the drip of the kettle and the tick of the mantel clock. Every sound seems exaggerated, every shadow too lively. The warmth of the drink spreads through you, but rest still refuses to arrive. The Victorians must have felt the same, half comforted, half frustrated, trapped in that limbo where you are soothed but not unconscious. Maybe that's why so many recipes existed. If hot milk failed, try nutmeg. If nutmeg failed, try posset. If posset failed, try brandy. And if brandy failed, well, there was always laudanum waiting in the cupboard. You think back to the bottle from earlier, winking at you like an impatient accomplice. But for now, you choose another sip of milk, because sometimes the simplest cure is the most stubbornly believed. And so you sit in the dim parlor, sipping something that may or may not help, listening to the heartbeat of the city around you. Sleep is not here yet, but you are wrapped in the ritual, just like countless Victorians before you. The warm milk didn't work, and the posset only made your stomach feel like a battlefield. You're still wide awake, staring at the ceiling as if it owes you an explanation. At this point, a new solution enters the scene, one that promises not to drug you, but to hypnotize you. Yes, in Victorian London, if sleep wouldn't come, you could simply let a stranger swing a shiny object in your face until you forgot how to keep your eyes open. Step into a crowded drawing room, the air thick with pipe smoke and perfume, chairs pushed close around a makeshift stage. Tonight's entertainment is not music, not poetry, but mesmerism. A man in a black coat, hair slicked back, stands before the audience, clutching a pocket watch. He claims he can put you to sleep instantly, no medicine, no milk, just the power of suggestion. Half the audience giggles nervously, the other half leans forward in total seriousness. You are chosen as the volunteer. He locks eyes with you, his stare as intense as a tax collector. You are growing sleepy, he intones. You're not, but you appreciate the effort. The watch swings back and forth like the world's least entertaining pendulum clock. The audience gasps as you wobble a little, though honestly, it's more from boredom than trance. This craze wasn't just a party trick. In the 1,840 seconds and 50 seconds, mesmerism or hypnotism, as it later became known, was touted as a genuine medical treatment. Doctors claimed it could cure insomnia, chronic pain, even dental anxiety. Canonical fact: in 1843, Scottish surgeon James Braid published a treatise coining the term hypnotism, suggesting it was less about mystical magnetism and more about a focused state of the mind. Victorians, ever eager for both science and spectacle, embraced it wholeheartedly. Odd fact: some mesmerists advertised their services specifically for ladies troubled by night wakefulness. One wonders how much of that was medical treatment and how much was, well, entrepreneurial opportunism. Historians still debate whether these men were quacks, genuine pioneers of psychology, or simply very charismatic insomniacs who figured they could monetize staring at people. Imagine yourself shuffling into one of those consulting rooms on a sleepless night. The wallpaper is dark, the curtains heavy, the air scented with lavender oil. The mesmerist asks you to fix your gaze on a candle flame. He speaks slowly, rhythmically, as if telling a bedtime story. Your thoughts begin to drift finally, and then a carriage wheel screeches outside, and you're snapped back into reality. Typical London. Not everyone was convinced, of course. Satirical magazines like Punch ran cartoons of mesmerists, hypnotizing entire dinner parties into awkward naps. The debates raged. Was this real science or just well-rehearsed stage magic? Meanwhile, patients swore they could finally sleep after sessions, whether from genuine relaxation or sheer suggestion. And let's not forget the entertainment value. Public demonstrations often drew huge crowds. Picture yourself seated among the fashionable elite as a volunteer collapses into a chair, snoring loudly, while the mesmerist announces triumphantly that science has once again conquered sleeplessness. You clap politely, but quietly think the poor fellow just had too much port wine at supper. By the late century, hypnotism was taken seriously enough that physicians like Jean-Martin Charcot in Paris experimented with it as a neurological tool. Reports trickled back to London, fueling even more fascination. Still, for the average sleepless Londoner, the main appeal was simple. You might fall asleep while someone else takes responsibility. It's oddly comforting to imagine lying there, letting a stranger drone at you until the buzzing thoughts fade. Perhaps it wasn't really hypnosis that worked, but the rare luxury of having someone's full attention, their voice steady and monotonous, until at last your eyelids surrendered. After all, you're here listening now, aren't you? And so the mesmerist bows, the audience applauds, and you are left wondering whether you were truly hypnotized or just politely bored into near slumber. Either way, you're still awake, but you've added yet another Victorian cure to your long list of disappointments. Your eyelids are heavy, but alas, still stubborn. If milk and mesmerists fail you, perhaps machinery will succeed. After all, this is Victorian London, where inventors can't resist attaching springs, gears, or levers to nearly everything, including the human need for sleep. Welcome to the curious world of strange sleep gadgets. Imagine stepping into a cluttered shop on Oxford Street, the kind that smells faintly of brass polish and desperation. Shelves are stacked with contraptions, weighted blankets filled not with today's cozy glass beads but with honest-to-goodness bags of sand, chairs that promise to rock you automatically with a system of pulleys, and even alarm beds designed to eject you at sunrise like a reluctant piece of toast. One canonical invention was the ejector bed, demonstrated in the Great Exhibition of 1851. The idea was simple. If you struggled to rise in the morning, the bed would literally flip you onto the floor when the alarm rang. It's a cure for oversleeping, yes, but one imagines many a Victorian insomniac lying awake all night, too terrified of being catapulted across the room to ever relax. Historians still debate whether the ejector bed was intended seriously or simply as a novelty to make visitors chuckle and perhaps buy the patent anyway. Odd fact, weighted blankets weren't marketed as cozy comforters but as nerve suppressors. The theory was that applying heavy pressure calmed overactive nervous systems. In practice, it mostly meant you felt like you were being slowly pressed into your mattress by a patient but determined elephant. Yet some Londoners swore by it. There are even reports of asylum patients being wrapped in heavy quilts, soaked with water, creating a damp cocoon that allegedly soothed them into sleep. Comforting? Hardly. Claustrophobic? Absolutely. And then there were vibrating chairs. Inventors believed that gentle oscillations could lull the nerves into calmness. Picture yourself strapping into a wooden armchair rigged with springs, then paying a penny for a shop boy to crank the handle and make the entire thing tremble like a nervous jelly. Very soothing, the advertisements claimed. In reality, it felt like being politely rattled until your teeth clicked. Of course, the Victorians also loved their sleep masks. Not the plush, satin things we know today, but awkward contraptions that looked suspiciously like fencing helmets, padded with cloth to keep out the glare of those pesky gas lamps. Combine one of those masks with a vibrating chair, and you'd resemble a futuristic knight preparing for battle against insomnia. Some devices strayed into the territory of the absurd. There were respiratory regulators, masks with tubes designed to control your breathing rhythm. There were sleep bands, which wrapped tightly around your head to suppress brain agitation. One particularly baffling design involved a clockwork mechanism that gently tugged at your toes, the inventor claiming that drawing the body's energy downward toward the feet would quiet the restless mind. Historians still debate whether this was medical genius or just elaborate Victorian trolling. The newspapers loved these inventions. Illustrations showed gentlemen smiling blissfully under sand blankets, or ladies reclining in rocking contraptions while sipping posset. Behind the cheerful sketches, though, one suspects many of these gadgets gathered dust after a few awkward tries. Imagine buying a sleep vibrator chair, taking it home, and realizing it only succeeded in keeping you awake with laughter or mild nausea. And yet, there's something charming about the determination. Londoners, sleepless and frustrated, believed that sleep could be engineered, that if you only applied enough ingenuity, you could trick the body into rest. Weighted quilts, vibrating chairs, toe-pulling devices, it was all part of the grand Victorian experiment to mechanize even the most mysterious corners of human life. So here you are, in your room, draped under a sand-filled blanket, wearing a fencing mask, while your toes are gently tugged by a clockwork device. You feel ridiculous, yes, but perhaps a little calmer, or maybe that's just resignation setting in. Either way, you're still awake but undeniably entertained. You lie there under your sand blanket, vibrating slightly like a confused pudding, and you realize something. Maybe the problem isn't physical at all. Maybe sleep is a spiritual matter. In Victorian London, plenty of people thought the same, and so they turned not to chemists or inventors, but to churches. Welcome to the peculiar world of church bells and sleep sermons. Picture it, a Sunday evening in a cavernous parish church. The pews are hard, the air smells of wax and damp stone, and the vicar has just embarked on a 90-minute discourse about the moral symbolism of turnips. You shift uncomfortably, trying to focus, but within 10 minutes, your eyelids droop. You are not alone. A quick glance around the pews reveals entire families nodding off like synchronized swimmers, their heads jerking upright every so often. Victorian clergymen, though offended by it, became accidental sleep specialists. Long, droning sermons combined with the muffled toll of bells outside created the perfect recipe for drowsiness. Some insomniacs even admitted that they attended services not for piety, but for the sheer relief of finally dozing. Historians still debate whether these congregational naps were spiritual failings or just a clever way to catch up on rest without admitting you had insomnia. One canonical moment occurred in 1851 during the height of the Oxford movement, when sermons across London became notoriously elaborate, full of classical quotations and theological tangents. For the average listener exhausted from work and half asleep already, this was less enlightenment and more lullaby. Satirical magazines gleefully printed cartoons of vicars preaching to pews of snoring parishioners. Odd fact: some churches were so aware of the issue that they experimented with anti-slumber measures. Ushers might patrol the aisles with long sticks to gently poke nodding heads awake. One report even claimed that a church in Lambeth installed iron studs on pews to make sitting too long uncomfortable. Whether that truly prevented naps or just made everyone crankier is still up for debate. But the bells themselves also played a role. London was a city of constant chimes, parish bells marking hours, half hours, quarter hours. For some, the rhythm was maddening, breaking the fragile edge of sleep again and again. For others, it became strangely soothing, a mechanical lullaby echoing across the rooftops. You imagine lying in your narrow bed, window cracked open, the faint boom of street pulls in the distance blending with smaller parish bells nearby. The city ticks and tocks like a vast clock, rocking you, against your will, toward drowsiness. Meanwhile, religious publications sometimes promoted scripture readings as a cure for sleeplessness. The Psalms, it was argued, carried a gentle cadence that quieted the heart. This may sound cynical, but even today, how many people have nodded off while trying to read something inspirational? The Victorians were no different, except they proudly framed it as moral discipline, rather than admitting the Book of Numbers was boring them into oblivion. Of course, not every sermon sent listeners to sleep. Famous preachers like Charles Spurgeon packed halls with fiery energy, holding their audiences wide-eyed. But in the quiet parish corners, away from celebrity pulpits, the average Londoner found their eyelids irresistibly heavy. Perhaps the church was less a house of prayer than the city's unofficial nap centre, so you find yourself, yet again, wandering into a pew, letting the low drone of the vicar wash over you. The bells toll, the candles flicker, the organ hums faintly in the background. The sermon rolls on, endlessly circling some theological point about patience. And patience is exactly what you have run out of. Your head dips forward, jerks back, dips again, and for one blessed moment, you almost slip into sleep. Then a child sneezes loudly, and you're wide awake once more. Typical London. The sermon didn't save you. The bells were soothing for a moment, but then they simply became another excuse to count the passing hours. So you fling open the window, letting in the damp night breeze, and you stumble into the next Victorian obsession: fresh air. If medicine, machines, and church sermons couldn't send you to sleep, maybe the atmosphere itself could. Victorians adored fresh air sometimes to a comical extreme. The new science of miasma theory, which claimed that foul air spread disease, convinced Londoners that night air could either heal or kill depending on how you managed it. Doctors advised restless patients to fling open windows no matter the season, believing that pure air was the ultimate sedative. Picture yourself in December, teeth chattering, lying in bed under 12 layers of scratchy wool, telling yourself, "This icy breeze is curing me." Historians still debate whether the obsession with ventilation was more about genuine health benefits or sheer moral discipline, since suffering stoically in the cold was considered very character-building. One canonical moment was the founding of the Fresh Air Fund in 1877, which sent poor children out of London to countryside retreats. The belief was that crisp breezes and outdoor sleeping could cure everything from insomnia to rickets. Families in the city, taking inspiration, began setting up garden cots and roof beds. Yes, imagine climbing a ladder to the roof, rolling out a mattress, and hoping the soot from the chimneys didn't choke you before dawn. Odd fact. Some well-to-do households built entire sleep verandas, glassed in balconies designed so family members could slumber half indoors, half outdoors. In Kensington, one eccentric gentleman even bragged that he slept year-round in a hammock strung between two apple trees. His neighbours were less impressed when the fruit harvest fell directly onto his head at night. The cult of ventilation made its way into architecture, too. Builders installed special flues and ceiling vents to keep bedrooms perpetually breezy. Advice manuals even suggested sleeping with your head near the fireplace opening, believing that air would circulate helpfully through the chimney. The risk of waking up covered in soot apparently seemed minor compared to the thrill of catching a whiff of clean oxygen. And then there was the fashion for night wandering. Doctors occasionally advised sleepless patients to take a stroll outdoors, inhaling deeply to refresh the lungs. Imagine yourself, wrapped in a shawl, wandering Hyde Park at midnight, mist clinging to the grass, the gas lamps flickering through the fog. You breathe in the smoky air and convince yourself it's restorative. A constable eyes you suspiciously, because who in their right mind takes a midnight stroll in slippers? But you assure him it's all for your health. Of course, not everyone was convinced. Critics pointed out that London's air wasn't exactly alpine crispness. Between coal smoke, factory soot, and the occasional stench of horse manure, fresh air was often anything but. Yet the belief held strong. Newspapers published endless letters debating whether to sleep with windows open or closed. Historians still debate whether Victorians were pioneers of ventilation science, or just a society collectively catching colds on purpose. So here you are, back in your room, windows flung open wide. The curtains flutter, the fire sputters, and the night noises of London drift in the clip-clop of hooves, the distant hum of bells, the faint cry of a vendor still hawking pies long past bedtime. The chill seeps into your bones, but you breathe deeply, reassuring yourself that this is healing, that this is sleep medicine in its purest form. You tuck the blanket tighter, nose freezing, toes numb, but strangely, you do feel calmer. Maybe it's the steady rhythm of your breath. Maybe it's the soft hiss of the night air. Or maybe it's just resignation. Either way, you lie there, wrapped like a burrito in wool, staring at the ceiling, and you whisper, "Tomorrow, I'm closing that window." The window is still open. Your nose feels like it belongs in an icebox, and you've begun to suspect that fresh air is just another excuse for pneumonia. But if you think your situation is miserable, spare a thought for those who couldn't even afford the pretense of a cure. Because in Victorian London, sleeplessness wasn't just a private annoyance. It was a condition woven into the daily grind of poverty. And nowhere was that clearer than in the workhouses. Step inside a London workhouse at midnight. The air is thick, damp, and filled with the restless shuffling of hundreds of bodies packed into long, echoing dormitories. Straw mattresses line the floor in neat rows, scratchy wool blankets piled atop one another. But there is nothing luxurious here. You lie shoulder to shoulder with strangers, the coughs and snores of the room forming a miserable orchestra. Sleep is not a right, it is rationed, like bread. Canonical moment. In 1834, the New Poor Law formalized the workhouse system, designed less to help the poor than to discourage them. Conditions were deliberately harsh, to ensure only the most desperate would apply. That included sleep. Beds were cramped, shifts were long, and the sound of guards' boots echoed through the night. Rest was almost impossible. Historians still debate whether the system was intentionally engineered to keep workers sleep-deprived, or whether sleeplessness was just an inevitable byproduct of overcrowding. Odd fact. In some workhouses, inmates were forced to sleep sitting upright, propped against wooden boards, because beds were too scarce. The theory was that upright sleep prevented idleness. The reality, of course, was a dormitory full of exhausted people wobbling like human metronomes. Imagine yourself lying there, stiff as a board, eyes wide open, your body aching from hours of labor at the stone-breaking yard. There's no soothing posset here, no hypnotist swinging his watch. Instead, you hear the groans of the sick, the scratching of rats in the walls, the steady drip of water from a leaking roof. Every sound magnifies in the stillness, reminding you that you are not in control of your own rest. The newspapers sometimes described workhouse insomnia with pity, though more often with disdain. The idle poor cannot sleep, one commentator sneered, for their consciences keep them restless, conveniently ignoring the fact that no conscience in the world can overpower the discomfort of 200 bodies jammed into a single dormitory. And yet, some inmates devise their own makeshift cures. One might hum softly, another rock themselves on the hard boards, and still others whispered prayers in the darkness, using repetition as a lullaby. A few even claimed that exhaustion itself eventually brought a peculiar kind of half-sleep, where you drifted just enough to dream while still hearing every cough around you. Meanwhile, the contrast with wealthy Londoners could not have been sharper. While aristocrats complained that hot milk wasn't strong enough, the poor lay awake because their stomachs were empty. While fashionable mesmerists charged shillings to lull ladies into trances, workhouse inmates were jolted awake by the clang of bells summoning them to labor at dawn. You shift in your imaginary workhouse bed, the straw poking your skin, the air stale, the blanket rough against your chin. Sleep is not here. It cannot be, in a place designed to deny comfort. You wonder how many thousands of Londoners lived their entire lives without ever knowing the simple luxury of falling asleep in peace. And as you lie awake in sympathy, you realize that Victorian insomnia was never just one story. It was 1,000 stories, divided by class, stitched together by the restless city itself. For some, sleeplessness was an inconvenience solved with a sip of posset. For others, it was the unending background of survival. The bells clang, the guards shout, and once again, you are awake, still awake, just like them. You've tried the chemist's bottles, the milk, the gadgets, the sermons, the windows wide open, and somehow you're still awake. At this point, Victorians often turned inward, into the mysterious theatre of their own minds. If you couldn't sleep, you could at least study your dreams, or, failing that, let a medium tell you what they meant. Welcome to the eerie, fashionable world of dream journals and spiritualists. Imagine yourself at a mahogany writing desk, candle flickering, quill scratching over paper. You've been awake half the night already, so why not record the fragments of images that float behind your eyelids when you doze for a few seconds at a time? Victorians adored dream journals. They believed dreams carried omens, hints from the subconscious, or even whispers from the beyond. By morning, notebooks were filled with lines like, "Dreamed of a white horse crossing a bridge. Must avoid travel." Canonical event. The rise of the spiritualist movement in the 1850 seconds brought seances, mediums, and an obsession with the invisible world. Suddenly, sleeplessness was recast as a mystical advantage. If you were awake at odd hours, perhaps it was because spirits wanted to communicate. A medium might advise you to keep your dream journal close at hand, because visions seen at 3 a.m. were considered especially significant. Historians still debate whether the popularity of nocturnal seances was spiritual curiosity or simply the result of insomnia made fashionable. Odd fact, Victorian dream dictionaries were bestsellers. These thick books listed every imaginable dream symbol and its supposed meaning. Dream of onions? Illness approaching. Dream of mice. Hidden enemies. Dream of cake? Unexpected wealth. One can only imagine the confusion of someone who dreamed of mice stealing onion cake. Picture yourself at a séance table in Bloomsbury. The curtains are drawn, the air heavy with incense, a group of solemn Londoners holding hands around the circle. The medium closes her eyes, swaying slightly, muttering that a presence is near. Then she declares that a restless soul is trying to reach you through your sleepless nights. Perhaps your insomnia isn't a nuisance, it's a gift, a doorway to another realm. You glance at your neighbours, unsure whether to be inspired or just more awake than ever. Some even claimed that sleepless visions produced works of art. Poets described seeing entire verses during midnight vigils. Painters reported sudden images that appeared between waking and sleep. One newspaper in 1872 recounted the case of a woman who, unable to rest for weeks, filled notebooks with dream-inspired poetry she insisted came from a deceased relative. Critics were divided, genuine inspiration or clever marketing, and there were practical side effects too. Some sleepless Londoners treated their journals as a kind of therapy, pouring anxieties into the page until their minds felt lighter. Writing down nightmares was said to empty the head, leaving space for real rest. Even today, One can sympathize with the soothing ritual of scribbling thoughts in the still hours, candle guttering low, ink smudging as you fight drooping eyes. But the seance crowd wasn't content with mere journaling. They wanted proof knocks on the table, flickering lights, mysterious voices in the dark. You can picture the room growing tense as the clock strikes midnight, everyone clutching their notebooks, hoping to record something extraordinary. Then bang, a poorly balanced chair tips over, and half the group screams. The medium, ever composed, insists it was a spirit making its presence known. You, skeptical but polite, jot down, dreamed of a loud chair, meaning unclear. Still, you have to admit there's comfort in the idea that your wakefulness serves a purpose. Instead of lying in bed resenting the ceiling, you could tell yourself you're a vessel for poetry, or a conduit for spirits, or at least the proud owner of a very confusing dream journal. So you blow out the candle, tuck the notebook under your pillow, and lie back in the dark, waiting for either sleep or ghosts, whichever decides to arrive first. The dream journal is closed, the séance has ended, and the ghosts, if they were ever there, have politely refused to tuck you in. You are still awake, of course. But if London's own potions and prayers aren't enough, why not look abroad? By the mid-19th century, the city was a global crossroads, and insomniacs were more than happy to import exotic remedies. Picture yourself wandering through a bustling apothecary in Covent Garden, shelves stacked with jars labelled in neat copperplate, Turkish sherbets, Indian hemp tinctures, Chinese soporific teas. The shop smells of spices, alcohol, and faintly suspicious herbs. A clerk in a starched apron enthusiastically assures you that every culture on earth has cracked the code to sleep, and he is here to sell you all of them. Canonical moment. The East India Company's global trade brought in not only tea and spices but medicinal plants. Cannabis indica, marketed as Indian hemp, was touted in London as a cure for headaches, hysteria, and insomnia. By the 1842, doctors such as William O'Shaughnessy published reports praising its sedative effects. You can almost see yourself measuring out a dose, expecting peaceful dreams, only to spend the next 3 hours giggling at the wallpaper. Historians still debate whether Victorians genuinely used cannabis as medicine or simply enjoyed a socially acceptable excuse for recreational fun. Odd fact, Chinese herbal sleeping teas were advertised in the newspapers, though few Londoners had any idea what was in them. Some were genuine infusions of chrysanthemum or jujube seeds, while others were simply dried grass dressed up with exotic branding. Imported directly from Canton, the ads promised, though the fine print rarely mentioned whether it came via actual boat or just the imagination of a local grocer. Turkish sherbets too made their rounds. Sweet chilled syrups flavoured with rosewater or tamarind were promoted as calming to the blood and ideal for evening consumption. Whether they worked or not, at least you had something pleasant to sip while staring at the ceiling. Meanwhile, wealthy households imported opium-laced tonics from the Middle East, convinced that foreign meant more potent. In the grand parlours of Mayfair, aristocrats compared notes on these remedies like connoisseurs of fine wine. "Ah, Lady Farnsworth, have you tried the Indian tincture?" "Indeed, but I find the Turkish cordial more soothing." And so sleeplessness became yet another arena for social competition. Who had the most exotic bottle on their nightstand? But not all imports were narcotic. Cocoa, newly fashionable thanks to imports from the Americas, was often recommended as a bedtime drink. Thick, sweet, and heavy, it promised to settle the stomach before sleep. Imagine sipping a steaming cup of chocolate at midnight, warming your hands on the porcelain, and feeling your mind slow until you realize someone slipped in a bit of brandy for extra calm. Meanwhile, doctors were divided. Some embraced these exotic cures, citing their apparent success. Others dismissed them as dangerous fads. In 1860, one physician wrote angrily that cannabis clouds the intellect and makes patients speak in gibberish, which, to be fair, might describe half the people at any late-night Victorian dinner party. Historians still debate whether these medical objections were rooted in genuine concern or simply colonial suspicion of anything not properly British. And so you find yourself once again in bed, clutching a foreign remedy that promised rest. Maybe it's a fragrant sherbet, maybe a hemp tincture, maybe an imported tea of uncertain origin. You take a cautious sip, the flavors strange and slightly bitter. The candle burns low, the city hums outside, and for a moment you almost believe it might work. Then your stomach grumbles, your thoughts race, and you realize you've simply added mystery indigestion to your long list of nighttime companions. Sleep, that elusive friend, has once again slipped away, leaving only the faint aftertaste of rosewater and regret. The imported tinctures have failed you. The rosewater was pleasant enough, the cannabis tincture a little too lively, and the chocolate left you staring at the ceiling, wide-eyed and jittery. At this point, you might expect doctors to step in with serious, rational solutions. And they did, except their solutions were often just as bizarre as anything hawked by a street vendor. Welcome to the world of Victorian medical theories gone awry. Imagine sitting in a doctor's study, the air thick with pipe smoke, walls lined with heavy tomes on nervous complaints. The doctor peers at you through wire-rimmed spectacles and declares gravely that your sleeplessness is the result of an overheated brain. His prescription? Eat raw onions before bed. Yes, onions. According to him, the pungent bite would cool the blood and quiet the restless mind. You can already picture the poor spouses trapped in onion-scented bedrooms across London. Canonical moment. In 1869, neurologist George Beard popularized the term neurasthenia, a supposed condition caused by modern life, railways, telegrams, and city noise. Insomnia was listed among its chief symptoms. Treatment varied wildly, from diet changes to electrical stimulation. Some doctors ran small currents of electricity across the scalp, claiming it reset the nervous system. Historians still debate whether these experiments were genuine attempts at therapy or just excuses for doctors to play with new gadgets. Odd fact: ice baths were another prescription. Patients were urged to plunge into cold water just before bed to shock the system into calmness. Theoretically, this forced the body to rebound into relaxation. Practically, it left you shivering, wide awake, and resentful of your doctor. Still, advertisements proudly displayed images of sturdy Victorians emerging from tubs with heroic smiles, while the text insisted that insomnia was banished by brisk chill. Then there were the electric belts. Yes, belts. Strapped around the waist or chest, these contraptions delivered mild shocks intended to stimulate nerve energy. One advertisement even promised that they could restore manly vigor and peaceful sleep at the same time. You can imagine the awkwardness of strapping yourself into a sparking corset before bed, praying it would calm your nerves rather than set the mattress alight. Medical manuals also recommended simpler, if equally strange, regimens. Some suggested eating a heavy meal of beef before bed, reasoning that digestion would lull the body. Others insisted on the opposite, fasting, to prevent the stomach from overexerting itself in the night, which was right. Historians still debate whether any of these dietary theories had merit, or whether sleepless patients were simply guinea pigs in a century-long experiment of guesswork. One especially colourful cure was mustard plasters. A cloth smeared with mustard paste was applied to the chest or back, producing a burning sensation that supposedly drew out the restless humours. Imagine lying in bed with your skin on fire, telling yourself you were moments from peaceful slumber. And let's not forget the medical lectures. Doctors loved to warn that reading novels late at night overstimulated the brain. Better, they said, to recite multiplication tables or review Latin verbs if you couldn't sleep. Nothing, they promised, would send you to slumber faster than declensions of amo, amas, amat. And perhaps they were right. So here you are, in your Victorian bedroom, dutifully chewing a raw onion, chest smeared with mustard, toes tingling from an electric belt. You smell like a sandwich. You feel like a laboratory experiment, and yet your eyes remain open. Sleep has not come, but humiliation certainly has. You've been electrocuted by belts, scalded by mustard plasters, and chilled by ice baths, and still your eyes are as open as a startled owl's. At some point, you stop trusting the doctors and start looking elsewhere for advice. And in Victorian London, there was no shortage of unsolicited wisdom. All you had to do was open a newspaper. Picture yourself unfolding the illustrated London news at the breakfast table, bleary-eyed after another sleepless night. Between articles about railway accidents and colonial expeditions, you spot a column promising household hints for restless sleepers. These little nuggets of advice were everywhere, often sandwiched between recipes and adverts for corsets. One recommends rubbing goose fat on your temples. Another insists you must place a slice of cold potato beneath your pillow. A third warns you never to sleep with your socks on, lest your brain grow overheated. Canonical moment. In 1852, the Times ran a series of letters debating the causes of sleeplessness among the industrious classes. One correspondent blamed the constant racket of trains. Another scolded workers for drinking too much tea. The letters went on for weeks, Londoners treating insomnia as if it were a great national scandal. Historians still debate whether the public truly sought solutions or simply enjoyed arguing about potatoes and socks. Odd fact, one paper published a cartoon of a man lying awake in bed, surrounded by labels pointing to supposed causes. Too much supper, unpaid bills, late-night dancing. The punchline? The only real cure was to marry a quiet woman. The Victorians, it seems, never missed an opportunity to turn medical problems into bad marriage jokes. Meanwhile, advertisements for patent remedies filled the margins. Dr. Snuggles syrup 1 sip, 1 slumber. Professor Quiescent sleep globules entirely harmless. The fine print, of course, revealed that many contained opium, alcohol, or a charming blend of both. Some adverts were accompanied by cheerful woodcuts of smiling families, tucking in after their nightly dose, blissfully unaware that they were essentially drinking liquid narcotics. Even the humour magazines got involved. Punch often mocked sleepless Londoners, publishing spoof articles about men so desperate for rest. They tried sleeping in coal bins or hiring street preachers to lull them with lectures. One particularly cheeky sketch depicted a man stuffing cotton wool in his ears, only to be startled awake by his wife's snoring, which the cartoonist labelled louder than cannon fire. And yet, hidden among the satire and snake oil, there were occasional hints of genuine insight. A few writers noted that sleeplessness often came hand in hand with anxiety, especially in the noisy, fast-changing world of industrial London. The city was relentless. Trains, factories, lamps, and deadlines pressed on people's nerves. The idea that modern life itself produced insomnia was beginning to take root, though few Victorians could articulate it in those terms. So you sit at the table, sipping weak tea, scanning yet another article promising salvation. Should you rub vinegar on your scalp tonight? Should you turn your mattress to face north-south instead of east-west? Or perhaps you should follow the anonymous gentleman who wrote earnestly that reciting the genealogy of Genesis aloud never failed to knock him out cold. You fold the newspaper with a sigh. London's printed words are as restless as you are full of noise, debate, and absurd promises. And yet, you can't help but try one more hint, one more trick, one more superstition. Maybe tonight, finally, one of them will work. The newspapers haven't saved you, either. Goose fat, potatoes under pillows, vinegar scalp rubs, you've tried them all, and the ceiling is still your closest companion. At this point, it's time to peek into the bedrooms of those who never lacked for comfort. Because if ordinary Londoners tossed and turned, the royals and aristocrats made sleeplessness into an art form. Picture Buckingham Palace at midnight. The corridors are hushed, lamps flickering low, servants padding about in slippers. In her private chambers, Queen Victoria herself struggles with rest. Canonical fact: after the death of Prince Albert in 1861, she suffered chronic insomnia, often writing letters late into the night. She admitted in her diaries that grief kept her awake, her mind circling endlessly through memory. Historians still debate whether her sleeplessness shaped her famously dour persona or simply reflected the burden of endless duty. Odd fact: aristocrats sometimes commissioned special sleep rooms apart from their regular bedrooms. These chambers were stripped of clutter, draped in heavy curtains, and equipped with peculiar furniture designed to promote rest. One duke allegedly had his walls lined with cork to block noise. Another insisted on a mattress stuffed with seaweed, believing it produced calming vapors. His guests, one imagines, politely declined invitations to stay the night. Aristocratic rituals could be elaborate. Lavender sachets were tucked under pillows. Servants read aloud from dull books. and glasses of warmed sherry were delivered precisely at 11 o'clock. In some houses, maids were ordered to rub the mistress's feet with goose feathers dipped in oil, a treatment said to draw heat out of the body. Whether this was soothing or just incredibly ticklish remains unclear. The nobility also had access to imported luxuries. One fashionable countess swore by nightly cups of Persian poppy syrup shipped at great expense. Another preferred a steaming bath in rose-scented water, followed by 20 minutes lying beneath fur blankets, even in summer. The contrast with workhouse inmates sitting upright on wooden boards could not have been starker. Royal physicians, too, had their pet theories. One advised Queen Victoria to eat plain boiled rice at night to quiet her stomach. Another suggested she spend more time outdoors. In fact, the Queen's frequent retreats to Balmoral Castle in Scotland may have been partly in pursuit of fresher air and, hopefully, sounder sleep. Whether it worked or not, only her diary knows. Meanwhile, gossip columns delighted in reporting the sleep habits of the aristocracy. Readers were fascinated by rumours that the Duke of Wellington could fall asleep anywhere, even at a noisy banquet, while the Duchess of Devonshire required absolute silence and lavender-scented gloves. The contrast between these public figures made insomnia fashionable in its own odd way. If nobles suffered from it, perhaps it wasn't such a shameful weakness after all. So you find yourself in an imaginary palace bed, silk sheets cool beneath your hands, velvet curtains drawn tight. A servant leaves quietly, having extinguished the last candle. You lie back, surrounded by every comfort Victorian wealth could provide, and still, you cannot sleep. The truth dawns. Whether in straw-stuffed workhouse dormitories or royal chambers lined with cork, sleeplessness was the great equalizer of London nights. The palace curtains are heavy, the lavender sachets perfectly placed, but your eyes remain wide open. Perhaps luxury is no match for the mysteries of the human brain. By the late Victorian era, some began to suspect as much, and science, real science, slowly crept into the conversation. If sleep could not be coaxed with onions or possets, maybe it could be studied, measured, even explained. Picture yourself in a lecture hall at University College London in the 1870 seconds. The air smells of ink, dust, and gaslight. A professor gestures at a blackboard filled with chalk diagrams of the brain. He insists that sleeplessness is a disorder of the nerves, not the soul. The audience murmurs, half skeptical, half intrigued. Canonical fact. Physicians like John Hewlings Jackson and later neurologists began framing insomnia as part of the emerging science of neurology. It wasn't demonic possession or weak character, it was a medical puzzle. Odd fact. Some asylums experimented with early sleep wards. Patients were monitored as they drifted in and out of rest, their behavior carefully noted. Treatments included everything from carefully timed meals to experimental sedatives. One asylum in Bethnal Green even kept a sleep diary for each patient, charting every minute of unconsciousness like a precious commodity. Historians still debate whether these efforts represented genuine compassion or merely another layer of control over the institutionalized poor. Across Europe, new tools emerged. The stethoscope, the thermometer, even early electrical devices were all pressed into service to study the rhythms of the body at rest. London doctors imported ideas from Paris, where Jean-Martin Charcot was lecturing on hypnosis as a neurological phenomenon, not a mystical trick. Back in London, these reports fueled hope that insomnia might one day be cured not by superstition, but by science. Newspapers picked up the theme. Articles described public lectures where physicians explained the chemistry of sleep, speaking of brain fatigue and nerve depletion. Some writers speculated that sleeplessness was the cost of modernity itself, that railways, telegrams, and the rush of city life overstimulated the mind. The Victorians had no word for burnout, but the idea hovered in the air nonetheless. And then there were the self-experimenters. One eccentric physician strapped himself to an electrical device to measure his pulse at night, reporting proudly that scientific rest was achieved after 15 shocks. Another attempted to weigh himself before and after slumber, convinced that dreams physically altered the body's mass. These were the strange beginnings of sleep science, clumsy but earnest. Imagine yourself as one of these patients, or perhaps one of the curious volunteers. You lie on a stiff hospital bed while doctors hover with notebooks, counting your breaths, scribbling notes on your every twitch. The gas lamp hisses, the clock ticks, and instead of sleeping you feel only the weight of scrutiny. Yet in some strange way, the act of being studied reassures you. At least insomnia is no longer your private torment. It is a question the world is trying to answer. And though their methods were crude, the Victorians planted seeds that would eventually grow into the modern field of sleep medicine. They didn't solve insomnia, but they named it, measured it, and began to see it as part of the human condition rather than a moral flaw. So you lie there under the watchful eyes of science, electrodes imaginary on your head, your dreams reduced to numbers in a ledger. You are still awake, of course, but for once it feels like progress. The chalk diagrams are erased, the gas lamps dim, and London exhales into another restless night. You've walked through chemist shops, drunk dubious teas, endured vibrating chairs, counted church bells, sniffed onions, scribbled dream journals, and even let science poke at your sleepless skull. Yet here you are, still wide awake. Perhaps, at last, the only cure is to surrender not in defeat, but in acceptance. Picture yourself back in your narrow Victorian bed, the quilt scratchy, the window cracked just enough to let in the whisper of night air. The city hums around you, but it feels softer now, as though London itself has grown tired. A carriage clatters by more slowly, the bells mark the hours with gentler chimes. Even the rats in the rafters seem less ambitious. You've travelled far through cures and contraptions, and somehow the absurdity of it all begins to feel strangely soothing. Canonical fact: by the 1890 seconds, physicians admitted that most insomnia remedies were unreliable. Time, patience, and moderation became the official advice in many medical journals. Oddly enough, that may have been the wisest prescription of all. Historians still debate whether Victorian sleeplessness was worse than ours, or merely better documented because the Victorians loved to complain in print. Odd fact: some London households kept pet canaries specifically because their nighttime silence was seen as a good omen. If the bird was quiet, surely you would be too. Unless, of course, the canary decided to practice a midnight solo. And so you lie there, thinking of all the strange remedies that promised sleep bottles and blankets, sermons and seances, onions and opium. You realize the city itself has been your lullaby all along, a chorus of clanging bells, clattering hooves, snoring neighbors, and half-believed cures. Your eyes grow heavy, not because a potion worked or a gadget succeeded, but because the story has circled itself into calmness. The absurd, the earnest, the hopeful, all woven into one long night that finally begins to blur at the edges. Sleep may not have arrived with a flourish, but it hovers now, close, inevitable, ready to claim you. And now, as the story drifts to its end, the pace softens, the clatter of hooves fades into the distance. The gas lamps flicker out one by one, until the streets are no longer restless but still, as if the whole city has finally laid its head down. The cold air that once felt sharp against your skin now seems tender, a cool hand on a warm forehead. Your breath slows. The quilt, though scratchy, feels heavier in a comforting way, pressing you gently toward rest. Each sound is distant now, softened, muffled, as though wrapped in velvet. The voices of preachers, the promises of chemists, the mutterings of doctors, all grow faint, dissolving into nothing more than background haze. The memories of onion, tea, vibrating chairs, and church pews become dreamlike, absurd fragments already slipping away. They no longer keep you awake, they simply amuse you, like the fleeting images of a dream you don't need to remember. You are not in a Victorian chamber anymore. You are wherever you are now, in your own time, in your own space, and yet you carry a piece of that world with you, its strange charm, its gentle foolishness, its reminder that even the restless have always found ways to endure the night. Let your thoughts blur, as the story blurs. Let your body sink, as if the mattress beneath you is deeper than the sea. There is nothing left to try, nothing left to prove, nothing left to chase. The long night has become your lullaby, and somewhere between history and dream, you are finally free to close your eyes.